welcome to MFP Live. I'm Donna Ladd, the co-founder and the editor of the Mississippi Free Press, and my co-founder and co-host is with us here tonight again, as always, Kimberly Griffin. Hey, Kimberly.
Hello, hello, hello.
So we're really excited tonight to have Mr. Antwayn Patrick, who is visiting with us tonight. I assume maybe you're in Lexington or you're in Holmes County. Is that right?
I am in Lexington, Holmes County. Yes, ma'am.
And Mr. Patrick is the principal at Holmes County Central High School, right?
That's correct.
And we kind of discovered him in a recent article that came through, and it's a wonderful article that appeared in the Mississippi Free Press last week by Taylor Hawthorne. And it's about the new documentary that a woman named Rachel Boynton did. And Mr. Patrick is featured in that along with his students. And it's a film about basically about the Civil War and about what we know now about the Civil War and the lost cause, slavery, race history. It's getting a lot of attention out there right now. I know it's on Peacock TV and YouTube TV at least. But we have a great story that kind of started out with students in your classroom and talking about that history. So we're really excited that you could join us here tonight as we kind of get into a conversation about this that seems about as of the moment as we could possibly be right now in our nation. But first, I would like you to tell us just a little bit about yourself, where you're from, how you ended up a principal, whatever you think is interesting for fellow Mississippians and others to know about you.
Well, born and raised in Holmes County. I went to Alcorn State University. Well, I actually graduated from Holmes County, SV Marshall High School in 1994. Went to Alcorn State University. Joined the military, United States Army Reserve for 12 years. Went to Alcorn State University, majored in political science and minor in history education. My grandmother told me I was going to do one or two things. I was going to either be a lawyer or a teacher. So I ended up going to Ole Miss Law School in 99, graduated in 2002, and practiced for about 6-7 years. And I was mentored in Holmes County. And what happened is that a young man that I actually pretty much adopted for the most part, his basketball coach left, and he asked me, can I be his head coach? And that was in 2010. So, and I said, well, I can do it for 3 months. And ended up, this is now my 12th year. So I coached for 9 years, taught U.S. history, coached for 9 years, actually won 3 championships, and became assistant principal about 2 years ago. And last year became principal at Holmes County Central High School.
Well, tell us while you're filling this in on the information, tell us a little bit more about Holmes County Central High School, including the race demographics, since that's going to kind of set us up for our conversation tonight.
Holmes County is about 75-25 blacks to white. Holmes County Central High School is about 98% black and about 2% other include white, Mexicans, but others. So, but predominantly African American.
And for people who don't know, it's a county, right, that was long it had a plantation economy, right, and it was rural. Talk just a little bit about that to kind of set that table.
Well, let me set you up of Holmes County. You have Lexington. You got several small areas: Lexington, Chula, Durant. Chula is actually the beginning of the Delta. That's where the land just fall flat. And from that point on, all the way up to Memphis or whatever, it's all flat. So it is primarily agriculture. Like you still have cotton, you still whatever. It's pretty much a rural area. So if you look at the economy here, We are ranked, I think, as county wise. I think we're number 50th county in the state when it comes to poverty. I think we're like 47, like number 3 or 4, like state country as the poorest. So and it's primarily agriculture. We have very few businesses here. Most individuals will work at Nissan, which is of course in Canton or outside the county. So they come back in. So do we have any industries here? We do not have. We have one industry which is in Durant, but for the most part, we don't. Other than the educational system with teachers, janitors, our education system actually is the largest employer in the county.
So, Mr. Patrick, I'm surprised we got you. They tell me there's a big game this weekend. I didn't think I could get an tonight. It's gonna be like, man, we gotta talk to you next week.
well, if it was Friday, you probably wouldn't have gotten me, but it's Thursday, so I'm getting ready for Friday. I'm getting ready for Friday. Yes.
So one of the things that we found interesting was that a history teacher, I guess it's not as surprising to me, but because you're a Black public school history teacher, but that's really different for a lot of folks, talking openly and publicly about race history. When you have these real conversations with your students, what are some things they don't know, or what are some things they tell you that you didn't know?
A couple of things. One is that raised by my grandmother and my great grandmother. So when you're raised by your great grandmother, who's born in 1917, and your great grandmother, who was born in 1934, I believe, and my grandmother's still alive. My great grandmother passed away about 5 years ago. So when you hear history, and my grandmother told me this, I thought, I picked her up, lived in Holmes County, and we was riding through Chula, and she said, they used to hang crows when you first come into Chula, Holmes County. And I would tell my students that those crows will represent that you are entering into Jim Crow territory. So for me, for those folk tales, for my grandmother to tell me that, great grandmother, was just, and I tell my students all the time, go talk to your grandparents, because those are living legend. But what I didn't know was about 5 years ago, there was this book written about this folklore, this guy in Holmes County who, in I think the 1940s and 50s, about to be lynched. He actually attacked somebody, white guy in Lexington, and he actually stood his ground. So, and I'm trying to think of the name of the book, because when I heard it, I was like, I thought I knew enough about Holmes County, but his great granddaughter was in my classroom, and I managed to get the book, and I'm like, oh my goodness. So between that and having a French teacher who just retired last year, she's 85, who actually grew up in that civil rights era, just for her to talk about those things. Those are some of the things, you listen, you didn't know, just from the people with boots on the ground. It's people like Etta James Carthen, first Black mayor in Holmes County, the Chula 7, or just different things you hear around the county that you're like, man, I want to know more. And the more I get, I get excited about, you want to pass the excitement along with the students, to the students.
What to follow up with that? What are some things that the students teach you when you're having these conversations?
Probably the biggest thing is that students cannot wrap their minds around how, I guess trying to use the right term, how slavery could have existed as long as it could have. Because their first thing is, I would have done this. I would have done that. and you have to take students back, say, different times. So it's hard for them to wrap their map their head around somebody being hung and nobody, and just the clean. We talked about the cleanse race riot, and I actually talked about it today. And my students didn't understand why there wasn't a total fight back. Why it wasn't more blacks, more whites being killed instead of blacks, and they were the agitators. So students, what they teach you is that they are very impressionable, but sometimes they are naive because they're thinking with today's mindset instead of the what happened in the civil rights movement and stuff like so they're more eager than you think. I get frustrated sometimes because I always say the farther you get removed from the civil rights movement, because I say my students all the time, when you hear M.L. Martin Luther King speak on TV, you immediately stop. So and I don't think it's the case now until you talk to students, they like, we want to know more, not just about MLK, but just different other civil rights leaders and different things like that. So there's a give and take. You get frustrated sometimes because sometimes students don't have the passion, but there are classes who want to know more. It's just like in a documentary, just get excited about history. So it's just as a teacher, as an educator, it's frustrating, but it's always rewarding at the end of the day.
One more question, and then I'll let Donna take it. One of the things we're hearing more and more, and I think of it as jargon, is anti-critical race theory, which usually when you drill down, we had the pleasure of speaking with a phenomenal educator a couple of weeks ago. And she said when she started hearing critical race theory, it's such a specialized discipline in higher education. She said, who's teaching critical race theory in high school? That's something, that's a attractive college. That's not something you teach. But when you drill down, it's just history, right? It's just the truth and it's history. What is your reaction to the anti-critical race theory forces, and have any of them shown up on your virtual doorstep, so to speak?
First of all, I would ask somebody to define that for me. If you can define it for me, then we can have a dialogue. But just don't give me a talking point what you've heard on TV about we don't want our kids to learn critical race theory. So when the documentary came out, and then I had an interview on MSNBC, I did get some messages about how I was teaching history wrong, and how I'm doing the kids a disservice, and I'm putting it in my own terms about teaching history from, I guess, an historical standpoint. So, but my response that I had a dialogue with the guy in the inbox was that if you can show me where I'm wrong, then I would teach it differently. If you just because right. The biggest thing I tell individuals or anybody is that one thing about history is that there are primary documents everywhere. There are secondary documents everywhere. So if I teach something, and part of being in education is you teach so your students can have a dialogue about the subject, to have a deeper desire to actually want to research more. Very few educators actually put their own spin to anything. But if you place that document in front of them and just have them read and have them only research, a lot of times there's only really one way in coming with a conclusion. So, and that comes with civil rights movement. That comes with Civil War. You name it. Just because you you've been told this your whole life, especially about the lost cause. Can you prove it to me? You know, and when I saw the governor in part of his, I think next year's agenda to ban critical race theory, it struck me as, I guess I was a little bitter, and it bothered me because it's just a talking point. But I think you're hurting just the fact that you're hurting teaching just history, like you said. You know, let's talk about the Civil War. You know, let's talk about the Civil Rights Movement. Let's talk about what happened in Clinton and Vicksburg. Let's talk about those things. And if you can prove that African American, for instance, is not still affected by slavery, then let's talk about it. Let's talk about, you know, what happened in the race riots in 1918, 1919, 1921. You know, let's talk about what happened in FDR's agenda that left a lot of African Americans behind. You know, let's talk about those things. But this critical race theory to me is just jargon. You know, it's just talking points to get people excited about a message that really doesn't translate to anything. And you hate that because people, for better or for worse, are so gullible to believe that we are brainwashing kids with primary and secondary resources. And I keep saying those things because I think that's when you're teaching history, it's just not the books. Even if you look at the Mississippi curriculum, it talks about some of the causes of the war, and they list on their states' rights. and you're like, and this is actually what was handed down by MDE and states' rights. And when you talk to my students, okay, let's talk about states' rights. All right, states' rights to do what? You know, let's talk about taxation. Taxation for whom? So, it was states' rights, but that's like part. I said you got A and you got A1. I said so states' rights falls up under slavery, but slavery is the higher topic or the highest topic, and then we can go from there. So I'm gonna put a selfish plug about the National Endowment of Humanities. I just believe that if you take some of those classes that they offer every summer, if you go on their website, and I don't work for them, but I've taken many classes for them, and you just learn a lot that just, I think every history teacher should go to, or a lot of English teachers. So that's why I almost mandate have a new English teacher, new U.S. history teacher who's actually teaching African American studies, second year out. So I gave him a book by Eric Farner that talks about Reconstruction, and said, you know, if you're gonna teach it, you gotta know what you're doing. So the website but it's under professional development, you know, where it talks about, I think some of the things I took was, which I didn't know, the new Negro movement that happened in the early 1900s, that it's not in the books anywhere. Slavery and the Constitution. You know, you start reading those books. So, but basically what I'm saying is that this critical race theory is just, as my grandma would say, mumbo jumbo to get you off topic.
To get you off topic.
That's right.
Yes, indeed.
That's right. Well put, huh? Well, you know, one thing I want to mention here is that, I don't know if you've seen it yet, Mr. Patrick, but USA Today earlier this week, did an investigation and a big story with graphics, et cetera, that basically shows who funded this anti-CRT thing and why. I mean, basically showing that it's, like we all kind of know, that it is this scam. It's this political thing in order well, to do a few things, but one is clearly to put all this pressure on teachers and educators, and our public schools in this very difficult time. It's like they're making their move, against the public schools, and particularly against, this kind of teaching. And I'll be honest, I don't think they're really hiding that they don't want actual race history taught. If you actually listen to what they say, they don't want young people to know it. They say that. And they say because it's divisive, because it causes guilt and shame and makes people, I've heard this all my life as a white woman from Mississippi. Oh, that it'll make Black people mad. And it's kind of like, it's like people will, there will be division because we all know each other's history, which is shared, of course, right? And so they say it. I mean, they really kind of say it out loud, if you know what I mean. It's like there's not a lot of secret there.
It's interesting when I hear people say being divisive. Yeah. Especially after what we've been through, insurrection and all kinds of stuff. I'm like, that is divisive. That's not right. That's more than divisive. We use the same, we don't use urgent language for urgent situations anymore. Mm-hmm. And we use urgent language for non-urgent situations like CRT, but we don't, it's so interesting to me. I was talking to a friend of mine about this yesterday, because kind of divisive is if I think you aren't taxing the rich enough and you do. That's kind of divisive. But it is more than divisive when when you are trying to wipe out a whole section of history and all this kind of other things. It's very interesting language. Anyway, Mr. Patrick, I think you have something better and deeper to say.
Yeah, right.
No, I just sit back and you hear people now, the same individuals that don't want to teach quote unquote CRT are the same individuals that would say we need to keep the those Confederate statues up. Because it's history. And you look and you're like, and those are the same individuals say, well, here, those were Democrats back then and not Republican.
Oh man.
But and you sit there and you just look and you're like, do you understand what you're saying? And you're not really fooling anyone else. You're really fooling yourself to believe. Right. You're not thinking for yourself. So and to go back to what you're saying, I did have a white teacher who was teaching American history. And the question was asked to me, how do you teach slavery and how do you teach civil rights movement? I said, you just teach it. You just teach it. Understand this is that we're not so emotional, so naive that we don't want you to teach it. We just want you to teach it right and understand that, bring some perspective to it. The biggest part I hate about being in a predominantly Black school is that it's good to have different perspective. And I think we're missing that in public education because we are so segregated. And it hurts both races. But it especially, if you willing to believe that many individuals in Mississippi believe that we shouldn't teach CRT in education or in secondary education, then what are you doing in the private schools? What are you teaching there?
Right.
And that's what makes it scary to me is that what are you teaching? I would love to see a documentary on what you're teaching with regards to slavery, to the Civil War, to Reconstruction, what happened to some of these race riots. How are you teaching those things? And how are you teaching those things without mentioning race and white supremacy and Jim Crows and all that. I want and how land was taken. If you missed a payment, how sharecropping. So I want to know how you're teaching those things that you say that shouldn't be taught. So those are the things that concerns me pretty much about teaching or not teaching history that you hear so much of the CRT. So like you said, I probably hadn't heard. I didn't hear CRT really up until a year and a half ago.
I know, right?
Right.
Right.
So,
well, we put up on the screen. We're working on this project that's actually coming to Holmes County. We're working on a section of our Black women systemic barriers and COVID-19. And basically, the point of the project is actually to look at in different counties, including Holmes, about what systemic and historic conditions and problems and inequities existed that made COVID be so bad for Black women in certain counties in Mississippi, even worse than for a lot of Black men, right? So in the course of that, we've published several of our Knoxville County pieces. And what we have up on the screen here is a kind of a sidebar that I did because I love to dig into history and put all the pieces together. And this is a piece about Central Academy, which closed in 2017. But one of the things I was able to do in this piece, because I found their old website, was to talk specifically about the curriculum that they were using. And they used two different curriculums, one Abeka, and the other was Bob Jones, as in Bob Jones, the racist university. I encourage people to look at this article because I broke down a lot of what Abeka and Bob Jones, one or the other, was teaching. And that includes this kind of, they'll say slavery's bad. They're agreeing on that for the most part these days. But then they'll say in this curriculum, they would say something like, but the best things that, and I'm paraphrasing, but that enslaved people could do for themselves was to pray and for the afterlife. So it was kind of this kind of really misleading stuff. And then they have Robert E. Lee in there as a hero without ever mentioning his bad stuff or the fact that he owned slaves and the fact that he mistreated those enslaved people. So the point, I think you make a really good point, and I know that y'all got some white academy stuff going on around there too. I'm not saying every academy teaches the same curriculum, but a lot of them do. So what you end up having is this 2 tracks, which is what you're talking about, Mr. Patrick, right? It's like this. Mm-hmm. So you got white kids over here learning this, and then you got Black kids and other kids of color in many cases, especially if they're lucky enough to have people such as yourself as their principal, learning these things, right? And then you kind of get public schools, and I think part of their focus now are public schools that actually have white kids too in them, where they're worried about that. They're worried about the kids talking to each other and having some really honest conversation like some of your kids were. So I guess my question, I don't know, respond to that however you want. Because you got something to say on that. I don't know what the question is, but you set me off.
I did see the book Hardest Deal of All, Different Education. Great book. I did read it myself. But I tell you this is that really our kids, for the most part, just been done an injustice. If you just look at the curriculum in most education, either they're being taught 7th and 8th grade in public education. They're being taught the Civil War at the end of the semester. So that's 7th and 8th grade year. So that 7th grade year. So simply is being done in about a few days. So if you ask most kids coming to high school about the Civil War, they really couldn't tell you. Well, the next time they get the Civil War is going to be, for the most part, or the civil rights movement is going to be their 11th grade year. So, and they only get it for about a week and a half at best there. So basically what I'm saying is that even in public education, they're getting it, but they're not getting that they're touching it. And that's why most kids, it's not near and dear to them, because we're teaching it as just, we're going to teach it and move on. We're teaching to learn, as in to have a test, but not teaching it for them for historical purposes, where they can understand, appreciate what happened in the past. The problem also in private schools is, if you're going to start with private school, you start with Brown versus Board of Education, where where a white flight starts to come. So I did some research in Holmes County. So the Central Home Academy and all the academies, it came out in 1954. It was a K-8, and then in Holmes County never really integrated. There was a separate school until Alexander v. Holmes in 69. And then the Central Home Academy School went from K-8 to K-12 that year. So a lot of time we don't understand that the genesis of these private schools happened because they didn't want to be around or integrated with African Americans. So if we start there, that's then now we can move on to other pressing issues. So I have seen some of the curriculum there, and like what you said, it is taught, but it's not really taught there in private school.
Yeah, it's interesting because I do think that the school board attacks and the CRT, worrying about CRT. I think you make a good point, Mr. Patrick. Or was it Donna? I can't remember who made this point, but they're not going to the Jackson Public School District, which is predominantly Black, board meeting to argue with them about teaching CRT. They are, so if it was really a concern and you were really worried about all the children learning all the things, then you would be mad about it at every public school district, but you're not necessarily. I am going to change the subject because there's a reason we found you. How did you and some of your students end up in a Civil War documentary? How did that happen?
Well, basically what happened is that Rachel Borden actually reached out to the school and wanted to do, and my superintendent said, I know there's a really good U.S. history teacher who you can go and see. So, and it just so happened we were actually teaching the Civil War and Reconstruction, and we were trying to tie it into the Civil Rights Movement. So it actually just happened right on time for us and the kids. And when she came there, we just talking. So basically what we were doing was we were talking about how laws may change. Like you might not have poll tax and Jim Crow law, but you might have voter ID, you may have gerrymandering, and those are the things. Same day voting. Just different laws that they must understand. So basically, to answer your question, that she reached out to my superintendent, and my superintendent basically put in touch with me. And I think it's on a Monday, and then she came to the class and film maybe that Wednesday and Thursday. So that's how we pretty much got on there.
So one of the things that stuck out when I was reading the story is that some of the students talked about how they did not know they didn't have white friends. They didn't really know white people. I imagine there are lots of white kids in many of our private schools who don't have, especially in rural counties, who don't necessarily have Black friends. as a teacher, do you ever, when your kids go off to college or when they go off into the workplace, do they come back and give you feedback about what that experience is like when they're meeting different kinds of people? What you may not have had time to have feedback. Well, you've been doing it for a long time. You've had time to have feedback. Yeah.
I think the biggest thing, and I tell people all the time, is that you are attracted to like individuals. So if you grown up in Holmes County, and for the most part you've not had a white friend, and it's harder, and they talked about it, to be friends with anybody in other race, because you have not seen or pretty much talked to anyone like that. In other words, it was harder for me because I know, because it was the same thing for me. And the only connection I had with anybody white growing up was working in the cotton field. So you had to work for the person who owned the field was white. So and you had a bitter taste in your mouth where the mail lady would call your grandmother by her first name, Roberta, and she had to call her by, Mrs. So and it bothered me as a child. So when you grow up and you don't have a connection with anybody other than your own race, and you go off to Mississippi State, USM, Ole Miss, it's a culture shock. And kids, and my kids were telling, and kids actually struggle with it. Going not because they're in school, not because they're not intellectual enough, but because the social part of it is that it's just hard for them to adjust to it. Most do, some don't.
So one of the things that sort of you kind of made me think about when we're talking about it, because I was really struck by that line where she said she didn't have any white friends, she just had some white associates. Were you already having these conversations with your students? Did the film create some different conversations, or did we just, for lack of a better word, parachute in onto what was already happening?
No, kids in education ask all type of questions, and you must be prepared for any question they ask. It could be on topic, off topic. It could be, and so I think where we got on the subject was we always bring it home to Holmes County, and because we talk about maybe Bennett Thompson, Representative Bennett Thompson, but we talk about Robert Clark, which is the first Black state representative. We bring it home there, but kids, and I think that particular topic was, how did he manage to get elected with very few whites? And then so another student popped in and said, I don't know no white people. And then another student said, I don't know any either. I got a few associates. And now the whole dialogue is now, how many white friends you have, Mr. Patrick? So with these kids, there's never a dull moment in education. That's why it's hard to get out of it, because every day is just a new thing with them. So in that particular class, that particular day, and all other days, do we talk about race all the time? But when we talk about the Civil War, Civil Rights Movement, Reconstruction, almost every topic that you can name in history, in U.S. history, whatever, it deals with race. So and I bring it back home to race, not necessarily to get them bitter, but to provide knowledge that you must have in teaching African American students, because quite often the history books are always tilted for Eurocentric, European type thing. So that's what we bring in. Even Columbus, we talk about. We go all the way back, and you find out just kids. You want kids to ask those questions, and you want to give them the freedom and say, you know, that question is interesting. It's not too dumb. So, but let's talk about it anyway. And that's why that's why you don't want a dull moment in the class. Because if kids just thinking, you know, every question can't be a profound question. It just can be something as simple as, like you said, I don't have many white friends, or I don't have many white associates. But then let's talk about it. Why don't you have it? You know, where do you see? So, in that film, we did talk about, you know, why don't you have white friends, or why you don't know many white people here in Holmes County? And those are some of the things that you know, hopefully I could, you know, you bring to the class that gives you a great talking piece. You know, sometimes the class only 50 minutes, or now it's an hour and a half. You know, it goes by pretty fast.
You know, when you're talking, it makes me think of something that I think, you know, might even surprise some people. But something to remember is that, you know, a lot of the white kids who are particularly in the segregation academies, right? They would say former you know, well, they wouldn't say that, but they call themselves Christian schools now. But most of them are overwhelmingly white, right? And as a newspaper editor here for almost 20 years, I can't tell you how many young white people have come to us because of the kinds of work that we do in this, you know, truth telling, and want to intern with us because they want to be in diverse environments, because that's been robbed from them. I even had a family member who went to an academy, and who's kind of said the same thing. Look, I really wanted to play basketball with Black kids, you know, and I didn't get the opportunity to do that, for instance. And so I think that's a little, I don't know apropos of what, but I think the point I would make as well, to build on yours, is that this is robbing white kids of so much as well. Interaction, the ability to develop deep relationships, to learn about cultures that are different from their own, right? And to the point that you make and the film makes, to know their own history, because she interviewed a number of white kids in other schools, you know, who had some different reactions, right? To the kids in your school. But you were talking about questioning, and one of the points that really struck me in the film, and with, I think one of the kids in your class talked about why do we have the same last name as some of the white families? And I've always thought that is, you know, once I kind of got old enough to understand that, because it wasn't taught to me either, what was probably going on there in my home state. I've always wondered, do people ever have those conversations, right? Like, that seems to almost be the third rail of all this for so many people, is that people they know with their same last names in the same community, you know, probably white people probably descended from families that owned their families. So I'm just curious about that. Is that something that you get them to talk about, or did that just come up? What are your thoughts on that?
It came up, and I told him about an episode on Sanford and Son, and where Lamont wanted to go back, and he wanted to change his name. He wanted to be, I think, I forgot what it was. So he asked his dad. He said, I want my last name to be like the African name, like Mumbai." And he just named it, and Fred said, I don't know any Black people names like that. You know, all my Black people from St. Louis, you know, their name Sanford and this and that. So basically, I was telling them is that your name come from, you know, eventually when you start shaking up a tree. I said, we were owned by somebody. I said, I just don't believe I came from Africa and my last name was Patrick, or your last name was Johnson, you know. So we talk about those things, and there's always a running joke. I say, you know, kids like, you know, I'm really bright. You know, some kids like, oh, I'm dark. You know, So and we place, you know, that, and kids are playful. They'll say certain things like, you know, I would have worked in the house because I'm light skinned, but we talked about Sally Hemingway, and I think that's always important. And we talked about how, and this is a touchy subject, is that can there ever be consent with regards to a slave and a slave master? And I always want to figure out what they think with regards to that particular, just any situation. And so, and you'd be surprised that kids would, you know, will be like, some kids say yes, you know, she love them, and so, and no, that's rape, and so that's the dialogue you want kids to have when you start talking about even your last name. You know, why is it that, you know, we don't have anything tangible from the 1860s and 1850s like other, you know, like white people? We talk about things like that. You know, you hear, like I tell you, you hear people all the time say, you know, I got this from my great grandfather who fought in the Civil War, or he fought. And I said, you know, so we talk about why is it that, you know, we don't have those things? You know, we don't have artifacts? I say I don't even have a picture of my grandmother until she was in the until 1970s or 1960s. You know, and what you find out is that kids, when you pose those questions, now they want to know why. And so, in explaining why, you want them sometimes to find the right answer instead of you. You want them to sometimes to research, and because I did a mock debate class, and you want kids to go back and forth on things such as, and it's a touchy subject, but you have to tackle, you know, rape and sex and with slavery, slave and slave masters, ships, and all this other stuff, because you can't get around it. So basically, kids, all the questions that was asked, everything is always impromptu in class. You know, I can want to go one way, but when you got inquisitive kids, they're gonna always take you in another way, another route. So, you know.
I thought Donna had something, but I did have
Okay.
one thing I've noticed. I guess among amateur genealogists, I've seen them over the last year or so. Amateur white genealogists are asking other white genealogists to, and it just never occurred to me, but I've seen them doing public calls to say, if you find paperwork that is a slave register or a sale of slaves, you need to turn that over to a museum or somewhere where Black folks can use it for ancestry research. And the visceral pain, like, people, it is very hard. Like, people are coming out of the woodwork. Like, I've seen my friends go, well, yeah, I have this. I didn't know what to do with it, and I was embarrassed by it. And so it's kind of like those things that people don't, no one ever said that to them. Like, you should take this somewhere. And they were like, I thank you for giving me a plan, because now I can be helpful instead of being ashamed, you know? And so it's interesting to have people, when you have these kind of conversations with young people, because they give you a different way of thinking about things sometimes. Yeah, so that was my follow-up, and that is my call, that if you do have slave registers, bills of sales of slaves in your family papers, please turn them over to your Department of Archives and History or your museum, because it's going to help so many people. Because when you're Black, you hit a roadblock on how far you can go back. You can make some guesses, you know. Donna. I think that was a tangent. I don't think it was a question, Mr. Patrick.
Yeah.
No, that's fine. It was perfect. It was perfect. Yes.
So we're getting to the end of the show here. Well, give us just a last, parting comment. Maybe your challenge to people watching this when it comes to young people in history.
Well, this is really to educators who teach history. Read more books. Just don't teach what's in the book. You can't be a professional. You can't. You have to master your craft. And far too often, I tell people all the time, we may stick a coach in there. And I'm a coach. So I'm gonna throw that in there. That who just acts or just, take out your books, turn to page 38, answer question 1 through 8, and what you're doing is that you're ruining kids because they don't understand, they don't know. And this is not when I was growing up, or some of growing up where you actually was a part of that history. Kids must know, understand, appreciate. But in order for them to know, understand, and appreciate, you just can't read a Pearson book and talk about the Civil War without pulling up primary artifact, without reading books, about anything. So my biggest thing is to educators that you must read, as the Bible says, show yourself worthy, not because you're certified, because you become a master of the craft of bringing knowledge to students in the classroom, where they can go out and they can debate others because of what you've taught them, because of what you've learned, the books that you've given them to read, and those resources. So it's not necessarily to the kids, but to the adults who actually are responsible for teaching today's youth, so they can understand what has happened in the past and how it lingers today.
Well, yeah, that's it right there. And I can't tell you, I'm so glad you joined us tonight, because just to have this conversation from inside a school, in a county, with Holmes County's history and realities today and challenges, and inside a largely Black public school, to hear the kind of work that you're doing is really exciting. And you did kind of inspire me to say one quick thing to maybe any of the white people who might be watching this at some point. One of these days we're going to do a story about some of the joint family reunions that happen between Black and white families because of these shared ancestors. And in fact, I won't go into it now. This is a story to come, but I found that situation in my own family and in Louisiana, and they have joint reunions, and I haven't been able to go to one yet because of the pandemic. And so I assure y'all I'll be writing about that afterwards. But I mentioned that now to say to people, imagine that, being able to get to know people and kind of celebrate, and it's not all a celebration, but to get to know each other and each other's history together, instead of this efforts at censoring because we're worried about being uncomfortable, and so anyway, that's my call to action, on top of yours. But we do appreciate your work, Mr. Patrick. Thank you for agreeing to get here so quickly. I know you have a busy life as a teacher, so we so appreciate you. To the rest of you out there, we'll be taking next week off, because you know what? It's Thanksgiving. We're not doing this on Thanksgiving. But in 2 weeks, we have the is it newly elected mayor of Columbus?
New-ish,
right?
couple months.
Newish,
couple months. About 6 months.
Yeah. Mayor of Columbus, Mississippi, Keith Gaskin is going to be here, and so we're going to talk about, a lot of things that are going on in Columbus. It's another city going through a lot of changes. And so we really look forward to having Mayor Gaskin here, talking about the Golden Triangle area. And Kimberly went to college over there at the W, so that might have something to do with this. So we'll be doing that 2 weeks.
I stay in touch with the Golden Triangle. I
know you do. I know you do. And also, everybody, please remember that we're a nonprofit news outlet. We're in our end of year fundraising campaign, our news match campaign. Right now, your gifts up to $1,000 are tripled thanks to two different um, donors or match foundations. And so please go to mfp.ms/donate to throw some dollars in the tip jar. And Kimberly would be really happy if you did a recurring donation, even if it's $5 or $10 a month. She loves members. This is her big goal, is to build up her membership by the end of the year. So do that for Kimberly and she will be very happy. So we do appreciate all of you. Please share this show later. It's on YouTube as well as Facebook Live. And keep talking about history out there. Keep reading. Keep getting to know what, the things that we have in common with other people. And we will see you guys in 2 weeks. Happy Thanksgiving.